What is the new Asian power play? Why is China siding with India now? And how will India navigate between US tariffs and China's outreach? India and China ties have seen their fair share of ups and downs. Today's moment, where China is siding with India amidst US pressure, is another peak in India-China ties. But the question is this a real friendship hand, or there are geopolitical angles that we need to understand? Hello everyone, welcome to Vajiram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh, and today we are going to understand that what is the situation that India needs to navigate between the US pressure, US tariffs, protecting its economy, and China's outreach. So let us begin with understanding that what is the present scenario that we are talking about. Again, resumption of ties between India and China. So basically this all started with US as the trigger point when US announced 25% tariffs plus penalty for buying Russian oil on India, and then later it went ahead and made it 50%. Now that was the trigger point when India was isolated in a way. When China was not being sanctioned by tariffs, it was only India that was being targeted, and that puts Indian economy in a difficult situation because a huge chunk of exports goes to US. With such high tariffs, our competitiveness goes down, our economy is hurt, and especially the key pillars, for example, farmers, MSMEs, that would be badly hurt in such situation. So in this whole scenario, when India is trying to figure out how to navigate this situation, how to get back US on the table without compromising its own economic sovereignty, its energy security, in this situation, China has come up and gone ahead and labeled US as a bully, and they said that they need to come together and call out economies, countries that are doing wrong, and this is where they have been calling for a greater India-China economic cooperation. Now this statement came from Chinese ambassador Zhu Fiong, and who has went ahead and labeled US as a bully. So whole of this scenario that has been put forth is a clear understanding that China wants India to side with them, and they are openly okay calling out US when their practices are going against multilateral organizations such as WTO and the norms that have been followed for a very long while. Now why this changes the whole situation is because India and China relationship has been somewhere in the negative or stagnant because of the Galwan Valley clash, the Tawang clash of 2002, Doklam. All of these have seen somewhat of rigidity in terms of trade, because India was very clear, we are not going to compromise our sovereignty and carry on with the trade. Both of these things will go at their own, go parallelly, where de-escalation will also happen, then only trade will happen. From past 10 to 15 days, there have been certain changes of scenario, and we have been seeing thawing in the cold rigid relations, where there has been trade resumptions from the Lipu Lake route, there is the resumption of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, and now China is openly siding with India. Now in this situation, this becomes a very important, significant point where after years of hostility, especially when I am talking about Galwan clash, Doklam, then we are talking about the Tawang clash that happened, all of these situations, this comes as a better point where India is on not just on the table, but India is being taken as a partner by China, where China is ready to stand with India together. And this also clearly indicates from the perspective of analysis that how economic pressures or global economic scenarios can totally change the diplomacy and geopolitical relations that exist. Now we will be trying to understand all of this from all the perspectives. So before we go ahead into it, let us try to understand that what I am saying when I mean between ups and downs that have been seen between Sino-Indian ties. So when we talk about 1950s, that was the time where China and India went ahead and started their diplomatic relations, and they also signed Panchsheel Agreement in 1954 under the Prime Ministership of Jawaharlal Nehru. But just few years later in 1962, we had a direct confrontation with them in the form of Sino-Indian War, and that is where we saw another low in Sino-Indian ties. Later 1976, finally restoration of diplomatic ties. Then we went ahead and gave the most favored nation agreement as well. Also we saw that India conducted nuclear tests, China criticized, but there was continuous trade and there was reopening of Nathula Pass for trade in 2006. But we have to understand that China was in a favorable position. If you talk about 2005, Chinese premier, they supported India's UN bid. There was resumption of trade. But after especially 2014-15, we have seen decline in the relations. 2017 Doklam, then 2020 Galwan, 2022 Tawan region in Arunachal Pradesh. All these regions have shown that how China has behaved expansionist, how they have escalated the situation and how they have participated in grave warfare strategy as well. All these indicates that we had reached to a headstrong position with China. Now, in this situation, this new entry, this new announcement brings up many questions at our end, and that calls for an understanding of all dimensions, starting with economic dimensions. When we are talking about economic dimensions, it is important for India to understand that they are heavily reliant on Russian crude oil to control inflation also and domestic costs as well. Your petrol costs lesser because India is able to import discounted Russian oil. So if we have to let go of that because of US pressure, there will be macroeconomic numbers changing and your petrol will get costlier as well. At the same time, when we are talking about the export market, if we do not let go of the Russian crude oil, our export market is going to get hurt, economy is going to tumble, and that is again going to come to you. So it is not just a problem at the national level, it is the problem that will percolate and exist for all of us as well. In this situation, China has given us a hand of friendship where it is inviting Indian companies, Indian investment into its own country. It is on the table and it is seeking a fair, just and non-discriminatory environment for Chinese firms to come and work in India. And it is also publicly opposing any sort of tariff war, and it is asking to work on WTO framework. Now this directly means that India has to consider China as a partner. Now China is on the table, and that means it might have to economically converge with China because of the US trade pressure. This will give India the possibility to diversify its markets away from US, where we have been kind of over reliant in terms of exports. And it also puts India in a dilemma that can India trust China as a trade partner? Because if you look at Chinese investment in other countries, they have nothing but the debt trap policy. So India has to be very cautious and very judicially understand this extension of friendship hand, that how it is to be tackled. Just because we are being pressured from one superpower, we cannot give into another superpower when we are itself an emerging superpower. So we have to very cautiously look into the situation. Another dimension that lies in front of us is the geopolitical and strategic dimension. For example, if we're talking about China's extension of friendship or China's outreach, it does not come out of kind-heartedness. Here, China is also looking to bring India into its team because it will help China to weaken the Quad, which exists between India, US, Australia and Japan. So basically, Quad was made to counter China's presence in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, if India, an important player in the Quad, if it sides and it goes to China's end, that means China is looking for a moment where there is a rift between India and US, and it can get India into its own place. Furthermore, China is projecting itself that we are a counterweight, we are an opposing offer in terms of the politics that are coming from US. So it is also proposing, China is also proposing not just for India but at the global order itself as an alternative. Furthermore, another thing that we need to consider, that how India is going to balance it out. When we are talking about balancing, India needs to continue its Quad membership and not let go of the strategic partnership that exists with the US, because we have always believed in non-alignment, we have always believed in our sovereignty, our interests, and we should continue to do that. In that scenario, it does not make sense siding with China altogether, but at the same time, it is definitely an important part that US should remain on the table. Simultaneously, we can continue to buy cheap Russian oil, but we have to use strategic autonomy to balance all three major powers, not just China and US, but China, US and Russia as well. And all in all, that will be a question for you when India is walking this tightrope where we are trying to balance economic necessity as well as security, energy security. What are the major things that India should focus on? Try to think about the Swadeshi 2.0 that has been pitched as well, and you can put down your thoughts in the comment section. Now that was all from my side. Thank you so much.